All right. Welcome everyone back to another Game Dev Daily. This is Game Dev Daily number 17. It is January the 25th. And, yeah. We are planning on doing some design stuff today. Not actual development. I'm doing some game design. Mainly looking at some really basic like level design stuff we can maybe start working on. Maybe enemies. So it's gonna be like no actual code today, no Unity stuff. We're really just gonna, have Paint open, draw some stuff, and see what we come up with. Is more or less my plan. Alright. So with that out of the way, I think I can just hop in. Now I'm trying to think because I might put MS Paint over here today. I do a little bit of a layout switcheroo. I think I'm gonna prefer it like this. I might actually take this jacket off as well. A little warm in my room tonight. It is still summer. Okay, so what are we starting with? Well, what I want to start with is building like kind of the opening level of the game, which is going to be like really, really simple. Now, how much of that we're going to be able to do on, one single MS Paint canvas, I don't really know. I'm probably going to be zooming in and out a lot. So, we'll see. So we're not going to use a black background today, probably. Maybe it's fine. Yeah, I guess it's fine. How does brown? I have brown shows up okay. All right. Let's go a little thicker. Yeah, that's probably fine. So. The opening level of my game, I want to be a pretty, like, grassy area. So, if I just draw, like, a line and hopefully keep it relatively straight. There we go. That's a pretty damn straight line. I'm gonna have an area that's, like, relatively... It's your, like, opening area, right? Like, it's pretty standard. And what I want to have in the opening area is you spawn in a house, right? Let's say like this is our like little spawning house that we start in. And maybe I'll use the pen tool rather than the brush. Just make the pen tool a bit bigger. So here's our starting area. We're in this house. This house has a door and a window and yada yada. It's our little starting spot. I'm gonna draw a window. Boop, 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 boop. Should be a bit more. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna have fun just adding stuff to the house. So you'll have to bear with me, but I feel like doing it. And in terms of how our player ends up in the house, I will leave that. I'll leave that out for now. Like the backstory of how our character is going to start in this place is going to be left up a little bit. They're kind of gonna... This is not going to be their home, per se. This is the house that you'll spawn in, but it won't be where they live permanently. And in fact, the first thing that our player is going to do is immediately leave the house. As you might expect. Now, I'm messing around with the paint. I can do this. I figure how I can... I guess I can just use the scroll bar. That's fine. Yeah, okay, that'll do. Now, if I zoom out a little bit, so this is our tiny little house, and we're going to have like all this stuff over here to the left, which is like level, or we can do level design stuff. But, yeah, I guess that's one thing to note, actually, that my initial intention for the game is to start the player off in a spot where they are intended, in order to progress through to the rest of the game, you need to travel, you're traveling left. We're kind of trying to like break conventional norms off the rip. But you're intended to, in order to access the rest of the game, you go left into other areas. And so a lot of the game is actually going to be, you know, your 2D side scroller, but you're going to be going left for the most part. It's not exactly like the craziest thing in the world to be traveling left instead of right, especially in like modern day Metroidvanias and whatnot. Like, you know, you have Hollow Knight where you like Green Path is your first real area you go to, which is, you know, a lot of moving left. You kind of spawn in the center of the map and you branch out in both directions in Hollow Knight. In the game that I'm working on and like kind of, you know, brewing in my head, I want, if we were to build if I were to draw the world map, like let's say that this is the world map, then what we're currently looking at on screen here with the house, I would want to position it something like, I don't know, like here-ish. Like pretty far to the right. I want most of your exploration to be going to the left or to be going down. And then like, you know, exploring out this way, and maybe you come back this way. And then also there's going to be some stuff to do up above as well. There'll be some, you know, aerial areas to go to. But for the most part, like this is where you're starting. And most of your like progressional movement to get to new areas is going to be going left instead of right. Now, that being said, I don't expect the player to just immediately travel left off the bat. And yeah, as part of that, we're going to have something to the right. Like, obviously, you're going to be able to go this way too. Otherwise, I'd put the house in the very far right of the screen. But, you know, we're going to allow them to go, you know, right in addition. And if the player decides that, hey, I want to go right instead, well, what are we going to have? You know, what are we going to have over here? I want there to be some, like, really big building over here. Like, kind of like an ancient structure, more or less. Maybe not ancient. Ancient's probably a bit rough of a word. But, you know, it's like an old building with an entrance. And maybe it looks something a little nicer. Hold on. Thinking something along the lines of this, you know. And so you come inside and you travel in here. And as to what we're going to put in there, I'll probably leave that for now. Not going to discuss this too much. But the general gist of going right here is that the player is going to be more or less stopped. Maybe be prevented from going in this direction. I have some ideas as to, you know, how I want this to work, but yeah, you're gonna like you're gonna approach this big building, and there's gonna be a bunch of like signs and signals that, hey, you probably should go the other way. But if the player decides to press on, they will eventually be confronted with something that very much incentivizes them to turn around. So that's kind of the goal of the start. Is like, hey, yeah, I'm expecting the player to go this way, and I want them to eventually backtrack and go left instead. That is what we're aiming for. Now, let's use a bigger eraser just to make things a little easier for me. Cool. So, basically, I'm going to use a red line for this. If we decide we want to go this way, it's going to be an X. And they're going to be incentivized to go back. Cool. Now, in the game, I intend to have not exactly fast travel, but I want to have like warp pads, I guess, is my first initial thought. So, kind of think of it as if you've ever played like any Metroid game ever, any of the like elevators that let you travel between areas, I'm kind of just mimicking that, except my version of elevators will be warp pads. They won't have to be geographically connected, like you can warp to somewhere that's like completely different. And in that sense, if I go back to like what I was doing with the big world map, right? In that sense, a warp pad could doesn't necessarily need to take you, like if I take a warp pad here, it might jump me all the way down to here or something, right? And like these two areas in the map could be connected. In reality, I'm probably gonna have like a bunch of like segmented areas. And then each one of these areas you can jump between via these warps. And then probably have like one central area, which is like a hub, which has a bunch of warps in it that can jump to each different area. So I guess if I were to kind of go over that a bit more, that'd be more like, okay, this is my starting area, and I have this central hub in the middle, and the hub has a warp that goes to this, and there's an area up here, and it warps to this, and it has an area over here which warps to this, yada yada yada, right? And like, let's say I only had 5 areas in the game, the hub could go to any of them. And then potentially some of these individual areas would also have warps that join them to other areas like this and this, right? Not necessarily has to happen, but you know what I'm thinking of. And the hub area is probably going to be the biggest, and probably, I say a hub area, it's really just the area that is connected to the most other areas. Otherwise, it will function like any other area, other than the fact that it might be bigger than the rest of them. Probably be the most stuff to do in the middle area here. But we're going to start, like, you know, what I'm trying to draw overall here is more or less the first area, which again, I kind of consider to be this top right one. So this is where we are. And I intend it to be like relatively small. It's kind of just the tutorial area. And I would probably have that like the first time the player comes through here, it is literally just a straight run to the warp point that you're eventually going to go to. Like, let's say that like I end up putting the warp pad like all the way on the far left over here. I don't know how well this shows up on stream actually, but hopefully, okay, you can mostly see that. So, you know, like let's say this is the warp pad. I kind of don't know how I want to draw this. Something like that, right? Oh, yeah, not super visible, actually. You can see it here if I'm zoomed in. Yeah, okay, I can just stay zoomed out a little bit. So, you know, this is like the eventual goal, and so for the first time you come through this area, it's going to be pretty straightforward, like, I'm just getting to this, and this is more or less the tutorial zone, where you're kind of taught the basics, and I want it to culminate, like, this area should culminate more or less in the player unlocking their, like, first spell, which I intend to be the first water spell, which would be the heal. Healing typically pretty good. So yeah, it's gonna kind of be your typical like foresty area, you know, a bunch of trees, it's grassy, yada yada yada. And then in terms of how we want this to actually look, well, that's something that I'm probably gonna hop into in a moment. I want it to be fairly flat, but it doesn't have to be completely. There can be some elevation going up and down. Probably good to teach the player that, you know, jumping is a thing. And then maybe some cave components that go under the ground, right? Like maybe you can go down here and there's like some caves underneath. And like there's like ways to go down here and stuff. But I kind of want this, like this cave section to be like mostly you can't get, like there'll be something that kind of blocks you early on so that you can't advance too far down into the cave system. And the idea would be that like, okay, well, if I have additional ways to get between this starting area and the other areas, then like let's say that there's like a way to go from this bottom right one up to here, that this path could connect to like the cave system underneath this starting area. That you don't initially have access to at first, but you would gain access to later, right? So I think I don't want there to be much vertical. I don't want there to be much upwards verticality in this section. I think it's gonna be more or less just, yeah, straight path to this warp pad. This warp pad's gonna take you to the center, and there'll be some downwards verticality. So there's room to explore like a underground area, but yeah, no real vertical vertical portion. You just have this big forest, and then maybe a bit of a clearing where the house is, and then this section off to the right where there's this big ominous building, right? And then lastly, underground section. Okay, now let's what do I want to do? Okay. So there's one last key feature I want, which is kind of the last section right before the warp pad. I kind of want there to be a sort of, at the moment I'm thinking it'll be like some kind of fountain. So, you know, like, I'm trying to think how I want to draw this. This is like not that bad. Like this kind of deal, you know. And basically the idea of this is that this is where the initial like water thing's gonna be that the player picks up, right? Like, this is where they get their first spell. So this is gonna be like placed fairly close behind the warp pad. So it's kind of like you pick up this ability and then you progress a bit more further forward and you hit the warp pad and you go to like the first main area. Like you've progressed through the tutorial section more or less. This is kind of the equivalent of like my King's Pass from Hollow Knight, where although like the main differences being that I would want it to be, it's going to be bigger than that, a bit bigger. And then like another thing is that I want there to be like an actual combat encounter here. So I want there to be an actual fight at the fountain. And then the culminating result of that fight is that you obtain the spell, right? That's kind of the idea. So you do a combat against some like you know, basic enemy, because at this point you only have the pea shooter spell, you only have your little Mega Man pew 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 gun. So it can't be anything crazy. It's gonna be like a relatively straightforward, and then I guess the big thing would be that like the fountain adds like a layer of platforming that you probably haven't had up until this point. Like the fountain's probably gonna be like a Battlefield style, like Super Smash Bros. Thing where you can, you know, jump up onto the fountain and like run between the different layers and whatnot, right? Pretty straightforward. So that's like the big, like this is the, I guess the climax of the first area is this fight. And then, you know, you're taken to the portal and you warp out. And then you're kind of done with the starting area after you do this. Now, the question that is kind of a bit more, you know, up in the air for me is like, well, what the hell do I want to be present in all of this section here, right? And this is kind of like one of the big focuses of this stream is like, okay, well, how do I flesh this bit out, right? What kind of terrain do we want to see? How do I want the level geometry in this game to look? Because there's different ways we can do things, right? Like, currently, if I were to like hop into, like if I pull open Unity, right? You know, I have like this terrain set out in super like jagged geometry, which is fine. Like honestly, it doesn't like look that bad. And you see that a fair bit in a lot of Metroidvania style games where it's like ground and then it juts up, and so you have to just jump up from here to here, right? Like I feel like this is super common to have geometry like this. Because one thing is that it kind of avoids the developers really having to account for like slopes. Like obviously this is the alternative. It's like if I want to have elevation, then I can put a slope in and then my character will travel up the slope. Issues with slopes are that you have to actually like, you know, code how slopes work. It's significantly easier to handle collision and geometry when you're working in just purely right angles. So, you know, that's like something that I can bear in mind. Now, I wouldn't have much verticality to this segment either. So, like, really, in terms of this portion in the middle here, I would really just consider it to be maybe some, like, really minor hills. But for the most part, it's going to be relatively flat. And then again, maybe with the exception of having, like, okay, well, there's this, like, underground cave thing that goes down at some point, and like this goes underneath like this hilly segment in the middle. So that's one option. Like I can make it kind of hilly. Another thing we can do is I've kind of mentioned that I want this to kind of be like a pretty forested area, so you can have like a whole bunch of trees in here, right? And, you know, you'd have a ton, yada yada yada. And they're gonna look like trees. And there's gonna be a bunch, like, you know, obviously there's the ones in the foreground like this, but you'd have like plenty in the background as well. So you got like this forested area in the middle, and then one of the things you can do with these trees is you can say, all right, well, these trees will just have like branches that are effectively platforms that the player can jump up onto. And so maybe like progressing through this area, you have to like jump up on the trees. Like maybe there's like this gap in the middle of the forest where it's like this huge like section of water, and I haven't really decided if the player can swim yet. Probably will be able to. I could make it like some wall as well that the player can't scale, right? Like there's some reason why the player like can't proceed through this gap here, and the way to get around that is you have to like climb up the platforms in these trees, and you kind of, you know, make your way up to like up here, and then you can bridge down to like, you know, a platform that's over here or something. And so I'm kind of just drawing like random brown lines, but that would be more or less the idea that, like, you know, this is like a heavily forested area. All of this is just tree. And all we're really trying to do in this section is be like, hey, look, you're the player, you can, you know, just try to teach them, like, platforming, basically. Like, really, like, basic platforming stuff. And they have to use that as a way to progress through this level. Like, you're gonna have to jump up onto this, and then go over here, and then, you know, kind of do this stuff. And then you can progress through. And then, like, you know, you can, like, hide secrets and stuff up if you, like, go, you know, if you decide to go up high enough and you, like, maybe travel all the way up to the trees, you're, like, rewarded with, like, some, like, little benefit up here, right? It's kind of hard to draw a star with this kind of line, but yeah. You're, like, rewarded with something, like, before you do this initial encounter, yeah? And it might be something really basic, like it's just a small health increase or something to that effect. But of course, like, the player's going to be able to come back here at a later point. So this is another thing. This is another option that I've kind of thought about doing. And these kind of, like, tree platforms don't look too bad either. You can definitely get them to look decently nice. Like, not too crap. Especially if these, like, tree trunks that are in the foreground extend all the way up into the air. Like, they basically just go up off screen. You don't have to worry about, like, where they become leaves, basically. Because most of this, you know, leafage will be from trees in the background. Which you don't really have to worry about, like, that'll just look fine. Now, I guess, like, the downside of this style of thing is just like, alright, well, where am I hiding this underground area if I want it? Could still put it in, not that difficult, but, you know, you can even put it into flat ground and it's fine, but I think it's a little better if it's, like, kind of going into a hill like we drew earlier. But this is a decent option. You get some verticality. And I'm kind of just postponing the fact that I really have to think about if I want to put in slopes or not. I mean, it's probably something I should think more of. Like, do I want to code in the user being able to travel up and down slopes? In terms of going down slopes, it would already work. Gravity accounts for going down slopes pretty well. If you want to have specific momentum for going down slopes, like if you've obviously played like Mario, like most of the modern Mario games, or all modern Mario games basically, you can like slide down a slope by like holding the down key, yeah? And that allows you to like travel like faster down a slope than you would otherwise. So, I mean, like currently in my game, like if you're just a little player up here and you're like moving left, the game will just naturally push you down as well because of gravity. Which is fine, like that works. I'd have to learn how to do non-square hitboxes, but I think that's also not crazy either. But I'm giving it a look now. In fact, let's just pull it open, right? If I add a 2D object, or maybe we should just copy something. You know, I can just add a 3D object and take a look. 3D object, I'll make a cube. Here's my cube. Make it big. Big cube. Now, can I, if I assign this cube a collider, what do I have for options? Box colliders, capsule colliders. Oh, I should swap the scene. There we go. Box colliders, capsule colliders, circle colliders, custom collider is one, composite collider, edge collider. Edge collider is an option, which I'd be interested in. Mesh collider, polygon collider. It's a decent amount, right? Can't add custom collider. Oh, I have a box collider on this already. Let me get rid of this component. Remove. I'm gonna get rid of a decent amount of this stuff probably. I guess I'll leave it. Whatever. Alright, custom collider. What does this look like? Material is trigger used by effector offset. There overrides info. So I kind of have no idea how this works, other than maybe the material defines the shape of the collider. But I don't see anything else useful here. So let me pull this off for a second. And let's go like capsule collider, right? So capsule collider we can pretty clearly see here. So you could use this. This already can let you make like this would let me make a curved collision. Weird that I can squish it this way, but not the other way as well. I guess I just have to rotate it. Offsets. Oh, there's a direction thing. Horizontal. Yeah. So like here you can see like we can have curved hitboxes and whatnot. Let's remove this. Other options. There was like custom composites, another one. Polygon sphere. Like I'd have to take a look at it. Edge collider, I guess, was one I wanted to use. Edit collider. Yeah, okay. So stuff like this works pretty well too. And you can like, yeah, I would probably end up going with something like this. And then you can kind of just like draw out your slopes. Might be a bit finicky, but I'd take a look at it probably. And then here, yeah, you can see where the points are defined. And you can adjust every single one of these. It might be easier to use separate colliders. Like have multiple hitboxes and then make use of the circular ones. Might be a little better, honestly. Like, I wonder if you can do Edge Collider, but you can have it so that this... Like, if I have 2 points, if you could, like, make it a curved thing between them. I wonder. Points, use adjacent, offset, use by effector. I don't know, but, like, I would want this to be able to, like, curve this thing in the middle. There probably is ways to do that. Maybe I'm just using the wrong collider, but yeah, more or less. I mean, you can still kind of simulate curves if you just do it enough. But it can be a bit difficult. Yeah, you can see this like vaguely simulating a curve here, right? And the more points you put in, like the more curve it's gonna be. But again, there's probably ways to simulate curves a lot easier than this. But you can do hitboxes for slopes at the end of the day, is all I'm trying to say here. Is that slope hitboxes are extremely doable. And all that this would mean is that, like, okay, if my character here is traveling left, he's going to travel left, and then gravity's going to push him down because there's nothing underneath him. So he gets pushed down a bit. And that's all that's going to happen on slopes. So if we're going down slopes, I kind of, theoretically, I shouldn't have to do anything if my code's working correctly. What's difficult is going up slopes. Right, if my character's at the bottom of the hill, and he wants to go up the slope, well, if I move left, I have to push myself up as well. And this is just code that, you know, actually needs to be written. Where it would see, like, okay, well, this is where you would be next frame. Because you would be inside the slope, push yourself out of the slope. And that's currently not how my physics works. My physics attempts to move myself as far left as possible, and if I can't go all the way left, then just move to the wall. Like, there's no, like, pushing, and it doesn't actually move to the position where it's gonna move to. So I'd kind of have to rewrite a lot of stuff, I think. Which wouldn't be that bad, honestly, to have to rewrite some of this. Because I'm sure the way I'm doing it right now is, like, pretty inefficient, honestly. But yeah, like, what you'd want to do is, okay, let's undo all this slope stuff, right? So let's say I have this slope. In fact, let's do a really steep slope, just so it's a bit more obvious, yeah? Here's my character. I want to move left. So this is going to be my next frame. I would end up, like, here, yeah? And now what I have to do is I have to see, okay, well, I'm here now, pop me up. And so instead, place me up here. Now, currently this doesn't happen. I don't end up getting popped up here. I will just kind of stay where I am. Because in my game, it's going to ray cast to the left, or box cast in this case. It's going to hit the collision right here. And that's where it's going to stick the player. The player's incapable of going any further up the slope. So I guess, like, one thing that is doable is you can have slopes be their own separate layer that are different from walls. And I could write custom code just for slopes. So that's an option. I think it makes a bit more sense, though, for slopes to still be walls, but maybe not. Maybe that's not true. Maybe you want to have them be distinguished. Because it kind of makes sense that, like, if I walk left into the slope here, then I should get pushed up as well. And you kind of want that to be logic that's exclusive to slopes and not It doesn't also happen on walls. So I guess that's probably the real solution here. So I wouldn't rework any of my current logic, but I have to add in a new layer for this sloped angle here. And if the hitbox hits the slope, well, it basically tells the player, hey, you need to push yourself up until you're out of the slope. So definitely something to think about if I want to have slopes. Now, there's plenty of games that don't use slopes. There's plenty of 2D platformers. It's kind of it's pretty mixed bag, I think, actually, as to whether or not games use slopes. I think a lot of Metroidvanias don't. Like, off the top of my head, pretty sure Hollow Knight doesn't use slopes. I don't think there's any part in the game where you can walk up or down a slope. I don't think so. I think it's all right angle geometry. Which, again, is definitely the easiest way to do it. Like, you just work in platforms. Hollow Knight kind of has the advantage in that the vast majority of the game is taking place underground. With the exception of, like, Howling Cliffs. But even then, it's a cliffside, so you can still kind of get away with it. And Kingdom's Edge is, like, pretty clearly on this. It's meant to be on the surface. Or at least, like, there's very obviously sunlight in Kingdom's Edge. And in those areas, I mean, they still just use platforms. Like, there's just floating platforms all over the place that you can jump on. And I mean, like, you know, it's a video game. There's some suspension of disbelief there. It's fine. Not everything has to look super good. That's why, like, when I do this, like, little forest thing here, like, all of these extra platforms I've drawn, which I probably should have drawn in, like, a different color. Like, these are effectively, like, just tree branch platforms. And there's, like, nothing saying that, like, this, like, to a player, like, this is, like, pretty normal, I think. Like, it's just a gamey thing. How well you can integrate that into your environment depends on, you know, how creative you are, I think, with your graphical design. But at the end of the day, you're just, like, functionally, all you're putting in here is a series of platforms. Like, the graphical assets are what, you know, how well you can meld that into the world in a realistic manner, right? But I'm just gonna, like, you know, you want to have these look like they're branches that are coming out of the trees, but at the end of the day, like, a game is gonna be, like, pretty lenient with it, as long as it's not, like, too offensively or too jarring, I think. Like, what's a good example? I don't know if you've seen, like, any of you have seen, like, the new Sonic game, Sonic Forces, which I can probably just get. Just get a picture of it. Oh no, not Sonic Forces. It was the open world one. What was it? Frontiers. I watched the Frontiers trailer and I was like, holy shit, I cannot believe this. You kind of just look at a random point. You know, it's like pretty open worldy. You're kind of just like running through like these, you know, like big forested areas. And it's kind of hard for me to get like a good sample picture. But maybe this one's fine. You'll see stuff like this where, and it's dumped it in massive. Let me just pull it down a bit. You'll see stuff like this where you're just kind of running through the game. And it's just like, oh yeah, and there's just like random floating rails in the sky. And I'm just like, that's like, to me, this is like so incredibly jarring. Like, there's no like in-game explanation for like why any of this shit's here. Right? So when I look at like, okay, well, if I'm gonna have like this like forested tree area and you just have like all these platforms, at the very least it's like kind of to some extent connected, you know, to the game world, to the art assets. Like, the art kind of gives a valid explanation for why these platforms are here, even if it doesn't really make sense. It's still not just, hey, here's a bunch of random ass floating platforms in the sky. Welcome, Mirandel. Yeah, so incredible art. I am very clearly an artiste, as you can see. No, I wish my art skills were a bit better. But it is what it is. And I'm not too upset. The trees do ground it. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like, I'm discussing like, you know, I'm looking at building like a 2D platformer, right? And the current topic is, well, I have like this like opening section and I want to have like, well, what do I want? Like this is like point A and we're trying to get to point B. And it's like, well, what the hell do you put in all this center bit, right? And it's like an opening area and it's pretty bland and it's not meant to be anything like too crazy in it. So you want to be pretty flat. Like the player's not gonna have to, you know, there's not gonna be like a whole crap ton of verticality to it, but you still want like some variety. And this is just something that, you know, I drew up like as a possible option where it's like, okay, well, you just have like this kind of like forested area. And, you know, in the trees in this forest, there's just going to be random ass platforms that is like kind of like the branches of the tree that you can run around and jump on, right? And really from a game level design point of view, all that I'm putting in here is just a bunch of floating platforms. Like you can build this without needing any of the art assets. You just have this, like, you know, you have the ground, then you have a bunch of platforms in the air and the player can jump on all the platforms, right? But when you actually put art assets and stuff into it, then you're kind of grounding these platforms in reality to some extent. And like how well you can like mesh that in with the game and make it feel like genuine is dependent on, you know, how good your like art design is, right? And then, yeah, I was looking at like, I pulled up the Sonic game because I'm like, yeah, this is an example of like kind of the complete opposite end of the spectrum where it's like, yeah, we'll just put some platforms up in the sky and like, who cares? The player doesn't give a shit. So you don't need to, it doesn't need, you don't have to have it. The player can suspend disbelief to some extent. But it's nice if it's there. It's not a requirement, but it definitely, I think, gives a better level of polish. And I wanted to pull up, let me see if I can find some Hollow Knight's Kingdom's Edge. I feel like it's not necessarily about being like aesthetically pleasing, and more about not like jarring the player and taking them out of the experience. You don't want them to really think about the fact that like, oh yeah, there's just like platforms floating in the sky, right? Like this is, when I think of areas in Hollow Knight that have this, Kingdom's Edge is the first one that comes to mind because it's the most like not underground cavernous area. It's like, this is Kingdom's Edge, super pixelated because I've like scrolled it all the way down. But we can see here, right? Like it's pretty obvious when you're looking for it. It's like, okay, floating platform, floating platform, floating platform. And yeah, like there's stuff in the background and like clearly all this platform is like attached to like a wall or something. But this shit's just, it's suspended. Like that is what it is. But you know, as a player going through, it's like, you don't really care. Like you suspend disbelief, whatever. Like it's fine to just have floating platforms sometimes and no one really gives a shit. And for the vast majority of the game, it's not like that. Like Hollow Knight, like that's like the one area where I can think of where that kind of happens. Pretty much everywhere else in the game, they're really good at linking in platforms to the like scenery. Because usually it's like it's more underground, so it's easier to buy that like these platforms are just attached to the background scenery. But in Kingdom's Edge, like clearly that's not the case. Like they're just floating there. But again, like for most players, they're just like, whatever. Who cares? It's not really something you focus on. It just doesn't matter that much. So this kind of foresty platforming segment is an idea. And I mean, I could even like design enemies around this too, right? Like it's pretty... I don't know. Man, enemy design in 2D platformers is really hard when it comes to basic enemies, because kind of every enemy's already been done, right? Like let's say like the easiest enemy you can build, right? Like, so I have like this tree here. Let's draw this tree here. And here's like one of the platforms that the player can stand on. It's the branch that pops out of the tree. And it looks like this. And say I'm the player and I'm standing here. And you have like this little like, I don't know, critter enemy that kind of just crawls along the ground. Right? Which I'll draw in like, I guess, orange. It's basically a Goomba, right? I mean, it's not like, I mean, there's like iterations on it, but it's basically a Goomba. And the idea would be like, okay, this little guy like just goes in a direction. He walks this way and he can either A, hit the edge of the platform and then just, you know, turn around and start walking the other way, or B, he can stick the walls, so he goes down the side of the platform, and then he goes along the underneath, and then he comes back up, and then he goes around, you know, he does this. So you kind of have two options. It's like either they go around the platform like that, or they go back and forth left and right. In Mario, it's Goombas. In Metroid, it's the little crawler guys, whatever the hell they're called. In Hollow Knight, it's crawlers. Yeah, standard little dudes. It's like your absolutely, like every single 2D platform you've ever played always has this guy. And they look a little different, and like maybe they'll do something funky, but it's always like the first enemy, and all they do is move left and right and walk on the ground. They don't attack you. Like their only means of actually damaging you is they just come into contact with you, and then bang, you get hit. And so it's like pretty easy to put these guys into the game, and you can have them like on the ground in this grass area as well. But that's a little boring. Like if it's just the, you know, grassy area and they're walking left and right, well, they're just gonna keep going, right? You could like maybe add some intelligence where like they walk towards the player, and if the player jumps over them, then they start, you know, running towards the player again, like they turn around. But they're just gonna be like little critter guys. And so there's like, okay, there's some additional ways you can kind of handle this guy. I think in terms of like a tree segment, it makes sense for them to like go around the platform. Like I like this style of movement. And I think I would still want like a little bit of variety in it, right? Like maybe this dude, upon seeing the player, he like stops for a bit and hunches down, and then he starts moving, and then he like charges towards the player, right? Like moves really quickly. That's one thing you can do, which, you know, that's an idea for sure. It's like, how much like complexity do you want in your basic enemies? But yeah, like that's an option. If we're like back on the ground here though, right? Like I have like another guy, and like let's say this guy, his thing is that he like jumps. He just does jumps. That's his movement. And so he's a bit harder to like jump over. That's like a pretty standard enemy pattern. Hey, thanks for the follow, Miranda. Yeah, no worries. Hopefully, you find this mildly interesting. So, in terms of like ground-born enemies, that's kind of what I'm thinking of. There's also the additional... Like, okay, we're in like this tree, right? Let me try and draw the tree a little better. It's like yada, 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 there's tree. And we have another platform down here, let's say, like boom, 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 boom. You can easily have some kind of like spider enemy that like, you know, rappels down out of the leaves. And he's this like Angie dude. And then he just like loves projectiles at you. That's a pretty standard one as well. Or like maybe it's not a spider, but maybe it's something that's like attached to the attached to the trunk of the tree, yeah? It's like this dude that sits here and he goes pew, pew, and he just spits shit at you. I think from a game design standpoint, at the start of the game, it's important that your enemies that fire projectiles should typically, like, they either have to be stationary, so like they have really low mobility, or they're really weak and they die super fast. I think that's kind of your two approaches. In Hollow Knight, they follow the second one. Like the first enemy that shoots projectiles at you in Hollow Knight, I'm pretty sure is Aspids. And Aspids die in like 3 nail swings. Like they're relatively weak. Although to be fair, everything in the game is about that weak. They're also not super mobile either, but they have the advantage of the they can fly. They can fly around. Being able to fly is like a pretty big deal. They also attack super slowly as well. Like their fire rate is pretty slow. Projectiles move fast. Like, there's different ways you can balance all this stuff out, right? But I think like an enemy that like repels out of the leaves, or an enemy that is on the trunk is both good methods of having enemies that like shoot shit at you, but for the most part don't really move. You can have it so that this like, if I did this like spider guy, he can like move up and down a bit, but he wouldn't have any horizontal mobility. And then like, I don't know, is there anything else that like really pops to mind when I think of this kind of stuff? I don't know if there is. Also, damn, I really like this remix. I mean, it's just Song of Storms, but this is a nice lo-fi version of it. Song of Storms is a bit of a hit. Okay, I mean, like, look, we've drawn some stuff. How much do I like this forest area? I kind of like want to explore. I think like this is very clear. Like, okay, I could like make a level out of this. Oh, you know what? I even have another cool idea for it too. Expanding off this like X thing here, right? I think I'd like to have this be like a big chasm that's like in the middle of the forest. Something like this. And there used to be like a bridge here, right? That went across, and the bridge is just like broken, like it's out. And so the player can't get past this section because the bridge is out, right? So the player doesn't, jump up onto these platforms. Eventually they're just going to get to this section where, oh crap, I can't progress anymore. The bridge is down. Okay. And then they have to like, turn around, find branches, jump up. And then like the way to progress here is to like go, jump over these branches that are overhanging this drop. But then I can also pull this into, well, what if this chasm section, this is where I have kind of, this leads into the underground area. Or it's like, okay, well you have like, there's this like cave that comes into here, and then there's like a whole bunch of crap down here. And like this leads and this, and you can do all sorts of stuff where this goes in like different directions, and like this is like later accessible content, right? So I like this as like a potential like way to hide more content in the first area, but like have it so it's not accessible to the player straight away. Now, I think the way I do this probably is make it so that the player can jump down into this gap, and they might even be able to see this like entrance bit here. But because of this like inward slope, there's no way for them to get into it, like on their first way through. And if they just fall like down here, then they'll just kind of like they'll fall and hit like a void out. What do you call it? Yeah, I guess a void out's fine, you know. Like they'll fall down and then the screen will go to black and they'll spawn back up here and then maybe take some damage or something. I don't know, undecided. Is there pits? Is there bottomless pits in Hollow Knight? I don't think so. It's like, would I want a bottomless pit? Because like the question is like, okay, well it's cool to like make use of this underneath area to like have this lead into a separate cave system, but how are you preventing the player from jumping down into it? Is the next question. I just don't think you can. So I think you basically have to make it be a bottomless pit that they just fall into, and then it respawns them back up the top. But I do like, you know, having this cave system and like maybe there's a warp down here that goes to a different area. And like you can also make it like expand to the right as well. And like there's a bunch of stuff up here. And maybe at some point it like comes up, you know, near the house. And like that's like a one-way shortcut that you open later in the game, right? So definitely like potential for this kind of thing. It's already like, you know, kind of building a decent level design for this. I think the other thing I would consider as well, something that I'm like playing around the idea with is, okay, well, once we go and get the MacGuffin, once we go and get this water spell, but I kind of want the water in the fountain to stop flowing, probably. Maybe not, maybe I would keep it. But I can play around with the idea of like, okay, well, the water in the fountain stops flowing and the fountain dries up, and maybe the fountain is what was like, you know, keeping all of these trees like well hydrated, and then you come back, like you go through this portal and you come back like later and they're like all wilted up and you know, dead. Is an option, but I feel like maybe that'd just be a bit much effort. Also, it's like, at what point do they become wilted? Like, do you just go through the portal and come back later and then boom, they're dead? Like, it feels a little sudden, maybe. There's also another idea to toy with, which is, do you want to allow the player to get back? Like, after they've gone here, should they be able to get back again? Like, I want them to be able to get back through this, but I kind of expect that that's later in the game. So it's like, before then, should they be able to get back? Because you can like make it so that this is a one-way here, and that you need some method to get back again. Now, because of what this is supposed to be, I think I want to make it that this is always accessible to the player. But I might tinker around with the idea of locking them out and preventing them from getting back until they pick up an item. Like, the dash would allow them to like make it across this gap, or one of the vertical abilities would let them like get back up onto these tree branches after they drop down from them. Yeah, like both pretty reasonable ideas to float. I'm gonna redraw this enemy again and just have this be part of this paint scene, I think. Oh, today I learned you can hold shift. Oh my god, I wish I knew that sooner. MS Paint tip for anyone, if you hold shift and press the mouse button, it locks it in a line. I did not know that. Like, look at this, holy shit. That's crazy. Oh, you can do diagonal too. It's pretty hard to get it to do diagonal, but you can. And then we draw this like little orange guy. Pew, pew, pew. And then the little spider that rappels down. There you go, I got some dudes. These will be like enemies in the trees, and then yeah, maybe you'd want some like little enemies on the ground here, potentially. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe like this like segment right before the trees is like a good place to like add in just some like really basic platforms and stuff. And force them to do some like jumping or whatever. Like it's like, oh, okay, like learn how to just jump over this. And then I could decide if I wanted that to be, decide if I want this to be something. Who knows what I was going to say. Oh, yeah, sloped or right angles. I think I'm going to try and stick the right angles to the start, and if I feel like adding slopes later would be good, then I might do that at a later point. But yeah, I could easily have something like this. I think that this is like very like not a bad start. I mean, like this underground cave area could like needs to use like tons and tons of expanding upon, because if you know, if I want this to be the end of the first area, like horizontally, I want there to be like a whole like if what I've drawn above the surface here, I want this to be like maybe 20% of the area, and there's like another 80% down beneath. Maybe 2080 is a bit too much. Maybe it'd be like 40 above, 60 underneath or something. I don't know. I'd like figure it out. But yeah, I think the big thing would be like catering for the fact that this extends downwards, and I don't want the cave to like go through it, other than this point here where it like peaks out. You can do this. And then the idea would be later on, you know, you come through here and you can like make it through this gap. And then this pops out here. But later. I mean, look, I'm pretty, like, it's a decent session. I'm kind of just talking about random level design shit. Enemies. I think it's like good to take a break from just doing coding and actual like development to do design. And I think I might, yeah, I don't know if I want to go back to doing spell stuff straight away, or if I actually want to like maybe do some like basic level design stuff now and do some enemies. Like make these little like, you know, crawly dudes and like this guy that spit projectiles at you. Bit more interesting than just like stationary guy that floats in the air and looks angry but doesn't actually do anything. So yeah, I think I'm reasonably happy with today's session. It's given me a lot to think about that I can ponder on going forwards, and some ideas of things that I can like actually just start working on in future dailies, I think. It doesn't have to just be me doing spells, like I can actually work on creating some of these enemies and whatnot. So, you know, the game's gonna have some difficulty at some point. I mean, the other big thing is like, okay, well, like this little like mini boss thing over here. Boss AI is a big one that like, okay, like it's pretty easy to like make these little dudes that, you know, all for like very strict set patterns. But making bosses that feel like the right difficulty, like, you know, complex enough but not impossible. That's the hard bit. So this is the most like question mark part of this little scene so far. Is it's like, okay, well, what does this combat actually entail? I don't know. And then obviously like the underground bits intentionally left not fleshed out at the moment, so that's fine. But I like the rest of it. Okay, so I think I might just call the daily here then for today, honestly. Yeah, I mean, I think we smashed out a decent amount. I'm pretty happy with how much I ended up going through. I will definitely be on tomorrow to do... I guess we'll go back and do some programming. I'm a bit undecided as to what I want to do yet. I don't know. I guess I'll decide sometime tomorrow what I feel like jumping into. But, yeah, it'll be programming of some sort. Maybe some level design stuff. Bit more level design than what I've just... This is kind of like really broad. Like, this is the overall level. But it's like, okay, I'll have to actually like make the... Like this forested section is not going to look like this. Like you got to put a bit more thought into how you want to lay out the platforms. But it might be better to do the enemies first. Like build the enemies and then build the levels around the enemy design. Might be better, I think. So I might do that. Okay, anyway. I'm going to wrap it up here. But thanks everyone who stopped by for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the stream. Have a great day, and I will catch you all next time. Have a good one.